Yeah, and I think you were touching on something that was really intriguing for me, and this might be our good segue into how to use AI in decision making, because I think the issue we've been talking about in the last exchange really is the premise of getting more detail and a more granular view on the kinds of decisions leaders and organizations need to make. So ultimately, in a way, talking about a decision taxonomy or ontology, depending on how much fun I want to have on any given day around decisions. Yeah, so we've talked about the one-way door versus the two-way door, and we've talked about path dependency, we've talked about opportunity cost, and we've talked about some of the psychological factors that surround decision making. And you can begin to see the outlines of the reality that different kinds of decisions call for different kinds of decision making frameworks, whether it's a very low opportunity cost two-way door where we in a domain that is not very risky, we might say, hey, flip a coin. And let's contrast that with something that has high capital costs, that have significant opportunity costs. Maybe there's regulatory constraints around it, and we say, okay, this is the decision where we bring in Cynthia and August to facilitate the decision, and we have a series of meetings and things like that, and we have a whole framework around it. And first and foremost, if you're thinking about how you're going to apply AI to decision making, it's really great to think about it in that context as well. What are the different kinds of decisions that we need to make? And where is AI applicable in each one of those decision methodologies or frameworks?
Absolutely. I love that. And so I think that for me, I distill it into sort of two main types, right? Which is AI, supporting transactional activities and decisions, and AI supporting processes and systems, right? And so one on the transactional, right? This is really more at the point of need where AI is augmenting that. And it's also more immediate. So it might be that, we're, using a system for a translator tool, for example, right?
Great
So that's
example.
the
Yeah.
transactional one. So these types of systems require fewer resources. They have less impact. It's lower value, comparatively speaking, right? At the
Yeah,
point of need, it can be high value because darn it, I think
exactly.
I need that thing translated, or I think that I need that thing summarized, right? Um, but I think that, but relative to the process or systems approach, which is even bigger, it is considered a lower stake. That's the two-way door that you're just describing. But on
Exactly.
the process or system level, when we're talking about AI, and this is more of the transformation models that people are talking about, right? Digital transformation. These have deeper impact. Requires a lot more resources, a lot more planning across the organization for sure. Higher investment and risk, right? Because there is that one-way door. And because of that, I think the case that we were making in the first section, of our discussion was it requires deeper understanding of our needs, our activities, our workflows, linchpins, different cross sections. It requires alignment.
Mhm.
It operates at the intersection of all these needs and processes and AI tools and capabilities, right? So I think with all of this, now at this level, we're talking about a redesign. The transactional level, not so much, because you can still, these are tools that are just augmenting within the existing system. But when we're talking now about redesigning maybe more complex workflows to processes, or multiple workflows to processes, or then, ultimate system, now this requires that we have an understanding, it's preceded by an understanding of our tactical and strategic goals, right?
Mhm.
It's really a much more holistic approach. And so it's very important, going back to this, how that we break this down into all of these different facets. And if your organization is not thinking about that, but you're thinking about bringing in an AI tool that really is meant to support, or even alter a process or workflow, because we're probably not talking about systems, that's a high degree of investment, right? So people aren't usually stumbling into that, but we stumble into the workflow and the process, right? Because those are where the sales pitches are at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important that we think about this along those, I think, sort of two, sort of two approaches, right? The transactional and the more the process systems approach. And understanding, again, we need to just be much more mindful in applying these types of tools, and map those types of decisions that are meant to be supported, and to also understand whether or not those systems or those decisions are also even systematized within your own organization, because there are informal types of decisions and there
Yes.
are formal types of
Mm-hmm.
decisions. Formal types are so much easier to surface and understand, but a lot of decisions are made in ways that are not so transparent. And we'll get into that when we talk about some of the foundation model elements too, but that requires recognition at this point.
Yeah, I really like that framing, and particularly your commentary earlier on about understanding what our strategic and tactical goals are, and thinking about how we use AI in decision making. Ultimately, the question of our goals is a question for humans and for people. And there are ways with AI chatbots or other tools to help you interrogate and maybe articulate and clarify those goals that you maybe haven't felt you needed to until
Mm-hmm.
that point. But again, that is ultimately a decision or a set of goals and definitions that requires human judgment, the judgment of a person in some instances, probably the judgment of multiple people in the case of most organizations that are going to be undertaking these things. And similarly to the question from part one about who are we, is one of those questions, is one of those things that I think most organizations and most teams probably kind of gloss over very often, as opposed to really digging in and saying, oh, this is actually something deliberate. I think it's one of those informal decisions that you were just
Mm-hmm.
describing, and maybe something where we all believe we have a shared view on what those goals are or what our values are, and that may or may not be accurate, that we all do share the same values in the organization, or that we have the same goals as well.
Yeah.
So it's always really vital to highlight those explicitly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this brings to mind for me, some of the conversations that have been happening over the past few years now, where you have more startups, talking about exponential growth through AI, right? You can create a startup, really lean startup, relying on AI for a lot, and then this would be disruptive, right, to a lot of the incumbents who are using legacy approaches, in various functions across
Mhm.
the organization.
Absolutely.
And and I think that, yeah, we need to pay attention to that. But I think that for a lot of people, we're not in that situation where we're just add water to AI and we're gonna we're gonna grow a startup, or grow an edge function that's going to take over. And I think that it's really important that we understand um, the differences between the two. And certainly I think if we're in startup mode, it's a lot easier to be thinking about how different types of AI tools, and Lord knows there's a lot out there, there's a lot of crap out there, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
let's just assume the right types of AI tools that can affect tremendous efficiency, right? And so forth. Because again, just it's a startup. You have nothing legacy there, right? To address. But when we're dealing with most organizations, that are looking at AI, that's not the case at all.
Hmm.
And so even if we're creating, say, perhaps a new function, maybe it's even a new function that's in parallel with the existing function, right? So we can actually, assuming we have the resources, and we're creating some kind of a internal evaluation and competition between the two. It still means though that there's still the overall organizational decision functions that that are upstream still that still need to be supported by that.
Mhm.
And so it's really important for people to think about this, the decision flows through the organization, and the different expectations, through the organization as well, and whether or not the AI that you're bringing into the organization or AI that you're creating, right? If you're just, if you're designing your own AI agents or agentic AI, have the capacity to support that. And then this is where I think, touching on what you were saying about the human element, this is where I think it's so important that for people who are already the internal experts in the organization, that's where you come in, right? All of this understanding decisions and the workflows that we talked about, at the beginning, in the process that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, this is where, even if your organization has neglected this is an opportunity for you, right, to be able to understand these elements, to surface this understanding so that better decisions regarding AI can be made. And so, and there is no AI right now that can do that, right? To really be able to assess the organizational workflows, processes, and functions, and then also the spaces between that, right? The various types of human elements, the perspectives, the stakeholder perspectives, the the culture, right,
Mhm.
is another one. All of these, softer areas that we don't necessarily think about very often, right, that can be drastically disrupted by these new tools. But this is where I think bringing, as humans transition into adopting and adapting to AI, this is an opportunity for us, right, to lean into that human element, to lean into that human understanding, even as we are analyzing our metrics through, various types of computing, right, traditional computing all the way up to AI. I think it's really important that we recognize this, we lean into this, and that this becomes actually a very important
Mhm.
highlighted element, right, of this understanding, this prep work towards AI.
Yeah, I really like that premise of leaning into the human element, because foundationally and fundamentally, one of the things that the AI does for organizations and individuals that are trying to make the more difficult and complicated decisions that require much more deliberation and, let's say, deliberate methodology behind them too, is it has the potential to make some aspects of traditional decision making much more inexpensive. And I'm borrowing here very heavily from Cassie Kozikoff, who's the former data scientist from Google, and just did a really great interview with The Verge on how AI is influencing decision making. And let's just say AI is influencing decision making, and Cassie is influencing us in the course of this conversation about, hey, how AI is influencing decision making as well. And one of the key insights that she had in that conversation was the different aspects that AI makes inexpensive. And she compared and contrasted an example, and I've been on the data analytics receiving end of this many times in my career, where the senior decision maker comes to you and they say, hey, I need to make a decision and I need you to help me with the data analysis. Here's questions A, B, and C. Go do what you do and bring back the data to help these data sets to help illuminate this particular decision. And maybe the data takes 2 weeks to pull together and compile because of various complexities and dirty data and data cleanup you've got to do and pivot tables you've got to create in Microsoft Excel and formula you've got to put together and everything. And almost to an instance, the process of doing that for either you as the analyst or the decision maker as the stakeholder illuminates more questions that would require a different approach to the data or more data or a different kind of data. So there's a little bit of a reluctance sometimes midway through or towards the end to say, basically go back to the drawing board and start these 2 weeks over again. Thinking about some of the different ways AI might offer opportunities for whether it's the stakeholder or the analyst or them working together as a team to really suss out some of those opportunities that a person might come to after having done all that work, but to model things in various ways and inexpensively enough that we can actually break down that iterative workflow a little bit to get closer to what it is we're looking for in terms of data or information or analysis that is actually going to inform the decision that we're trying to make. I know there's a lot of moving parts there. I hope that made sense to you, Cynthia. I hope that made sense to our audience as well.
It does. And I think that I think that this is the beginning, right? This is just the start of our conversation about this, because
Mm,
in subsequent conversations, we'll be talking about different facets, different aspects of this. But I think, yeah, absolutely right. I think one of the things about that interview with Cassie that I really thought was important was she talks about the acceleration of decision making, right? As you highlighted. And and I think that that's really important, because not having the luxury of time
mhm,
uh, means that we don't necessarily have that luxury of deliberation. Um, and and I think add to that, I think that layer of competition that we sometimes feel because our competitors might be doing it, or we want to use this as a competitive advantage in some way, or that we're buying into sales pitches and so forth. There's a lot that can cloud our perspectives, right?
mhm,
And our judgment about how we want to approach AI. And I do think there's a there. I think many of our colleagues don't, and they're it's like, oh, it's hype, and we feel like we want to just double down on the human element. I think that there is a lot more that people are in organizations are doing that are not being reported as
mhm,
well,
mhm,
right? I think about the company that's investing 2 billion in AI R&D, right, in the personal product space, and you can bet that they're not publishing the outcomes.
nope.
And then and yeah, we can run patent searches to see what different organizations are doing, and try to get a read on that. That's just, again, the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm,
So I think that it'd be naive to say that it's a nothing burger, but it is also just really important that we think about all those non-technical aspects that we need to have in place, that we need to understand, right, as we embark into you know implementing AI. And or I would even back up by saying understanding how AI products are also being positioned in the marketplace, and whether or
mm,
not there's a there.
yeah.
Because let's not kid ourselves. There is a feeding frenzy out there. You and I lived through the dot-com boom, right? We remember all that stuff, because this is like, a reboot of that in many ways. And so there's a lot of noise. There are a lot of terrible products out there.
Mhm,
There's a lot of misrepresentation as well, right? So there's this whole veil, going on. But there's also a lot of good stuff that's out there too. So it's really difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff. And this is, again, is where expertise comes in, right? To bring in those human experts. During our polycrisis series, initial polycrisis series of videos, we talked about the importance of bringing in sort of a cross section of experts, right, to
mhm,
understand the polycrisis and be able to address it and make decisions around it. And the same goes for AI. I think most of us are not AI experts, right? We may be AI literate, starting at the bottom tier of, sort of that growth pyramid, right? We may also be AI proficient, in the sense that, we understand how to use certain tools, or perhaps even design some basic tools as
mhm,
well. And then going up the chain, all the way up to, those, various engineers and deep experts. But going up in that pyramid, by the way, we talked about that pyramid in the co-loop webinar that we did as well. So for
yes.
people who want to look at that, check out that link. But the idea here is that um, you know we are moving into a place where we need to be more intersectional, not just each one of us learning more about AI and combining it with our domain expertise, but now we also have to combine all of our individual expertise with others as well to gain that perspective. Because if we're talking about supporting decisions using AI across the organization, these aren't decisions that are being siloed within specific functions.
Mhm.
Some of these are decisions that are be cross-cutting, especially when we're talking about enterprise AI. And it's not like just this one team is going to be making this one decision any longer, or just one team using this one AI tool. It's an AI tool that could be an enterprise AI tool that addresses multiple types of needs, or perhaps agentic AI, right? That
Mhm.
has, different branches. So we need to understand and wrap our heads around the fact that this requires cross-functional, right, intersectional collaboration in the organization. And we really should be the ones to start doing that outreach, because a lot of people, most people are not going to be doing that.
Right.
So I think for those of us who recognize this, it's really important for us to do this, so that we can begin that dialogue. We can begin to bring together the tools. We can also help design or redesign various types of AI processes or AI augmentations that can be aligned with the various types of stakeholder needs,
Yep.
and not stumble into mistakes,
Mhm.
critical mistakes, perhaps, if it's a one-way door.
Yeah, there's so much in there that I want to touch on.
Sorry,
Um, yeah,
I'm riffing
so
now.
I mean, among other things, so talking about the gold rush. So I'm going back a little bit because that was one of the things that really lit a fire under me. To the extent that there is a lot of good stuff in that gold rush as well. I think one of the things to consider, and this also segues into your point about uh, enterprise decisions versus team specific decisions on AI tools, or how they're going to modify their decision making using those tools. And the matrix also, there's a dimension on the matrix about, are we going to use general tools like ChatGPT, like Claude, like Gemini? Or are we going to use point specific solutions as well? And it's the point specific solutions where, from my perspective, it's really difficult to keep track of everything that's out there. And I will say some of the things that I see for competitive intelligence or strategy or some tangential functions, I do see some good stuff. I'm not gonna lie, but I see some stuff too where I wonder, did you guys even talk to a competitive intelligence professional before you built this thing? And
That's been a
so
problem for a long time,
that's been a
pre-AI.
problem for a long, long
Yeah.
time. Absolutely. And I will say I've seen some really interesting things from some of the more established players as well. So if anybody's ears are burning that shouldn't be burning, I just want to pour a little water in your ears. You calm down. But to say that these are some of the decisions that organizations need to make about both deploying AI, and then also how are they applying AI to their workflows. And of course, making a decision is in and of itself a workflow, or sort of a set of workflows as well. And most organizations, one of the things that I think we'll come back to more often than not, because AI necessitates people thinking about these things, is what is our formal approach or workflow for making decisions? Because so often it has been completely informal. How many times have I asked a stakeholder, or said to a stakeholder, oh, it sounds like you've got a really interesting decision to make. How are you evaluating the decision, and how are you going to make the decision? And people look very perplexed, like I just told them I get my Thursdays from a banana. And to think that, oh, this is actually a formal approach where I evaluate the decision. I mean, first and foremost, I articulate what is the decision I'm trying to make, which is like step zero, that often doesn't happen. And then evaluating that decision again against some sort of ontology or taxonomy of decisions. Is it a one-way door? Is it a two-way door? What's the risk? What's a number of factors and criteria that I bring to play in determining, sort of your strategy needs a strategy approach, but your decision making needs a decision kind of approach as well. That pre-step on making a decision to decide how you're going to decide. um, Thank you for bearing with me.
No, no, you're on point. AI forces all
three.
of that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it does. Yeah,
transition AI forces it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is again going to open up this vulnerability And getting back to the point about what AI does fundamentally is make some answers inexpensive. It also, I think, gives us an opportunity to break down some vulnerabilities where it's one thing to tell your decision support person, whether it's your strategy team or your competitive intelligence team or whomever, it's one thing to tell them, hey, I have a challenge here, I have a decision to make, I don't necessarily know what it is, and to feel, well, that sort of, what is the right way I want to say this, that sort of like imposter syndrome that may come with having to admit something like that, versus maybe having a conversation with a chat agent interlocutor where you can be a little bit more open to the fact that, hey, I've got this challenge and I don't know how to address it. And that's another thing that, getting back to the point about AI making things less expensive, it also makes some things less painful emotionally as well, if we're doing it in the right way. And of course, you're not, in this case, you're not asking chat GPT or some other generative AI or chatbot to make the decision. You're using it as that sounding board, as that sparring partner to help you interrogate what is the decision that you really need to make, and then how are you going to take that back to the people and the processes that are going to actually help you make that decision. And that's one of the main ways AI can make us all better decision makers, in my observation.
Right, right. But it does take, I think, that sense of that mindfulness, right, about how we're doing
Mm.
things and what our needs are, right? So, what are the gaps in terms of our current process, right? And and whether or not AI can serve to augment that. But I think the other piece too, when we're talking about using AI for decision making, and I want to include AI planning in this too, is that I think a lot of folks are really more framing and indexing to the way that they're currently doing things,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
So
yes.
this is our process, this is the way we do things, and how can AI help this? Fair enough, right? I think that for many people who are starting out, that's the safest play, that's the two-way door. But I think that it's really important for us, especially as AI continues to evolve and then becomes less expensive. Right now, because it is still costly to run AI, we're not we're not leaning into the full capabilities of it yet. So most people are maybe using the free chat GPT, right, account to
Yep.
search. And they think that's what AI can do. And yeah, you get the hallucinations, you get a lot of, junk and so forth. But that's not the one that they're necessarily, well, that's definitely not the one that they're running against the benchmarks, right?
Right.
It's not the one, these aren't the ones that we're seeing when Anthropic and OpenAI and others are basically saying, yeah, we've exceeded this capacity, or that, we've made this breakthrough and so forth. Most of us are not seeing any of that stuff.
Mm.
And then we're also moving towards agentic, now we're combining different capabilities, right, into a flow. And so again, most of us are still not realizing the full capabilities that currently exist in these tools. We're just getting a peek of it. So it's really hard for us to understand um, where this is headed. Right?
Mhm.
So so for our touchstone, we are evaluating AI to what we know and understand in terms of AI that we see, generative AI, right,
Mhm.
primarily, and the in our existing processes that we know that we've internalized. But what's really important, I think, for a lot of people who are on the strategic side and who are actual planners in the organization, is for us to break out of these frames,
Mhm.
to understand where AI is headed, right, based on what AI's current capacity is on certainly behind the scenes, right, beyond what we tend to see day to day, and where the research, where a lot of the research is starting to go. And this requires that we break out of sort of the current boxes that we're in, because we're looking at AI, through our current understanding,
Mhm.
right? As opposed to sort of starting with a blank slate and saying, okay, if I were an alien just coming in and looking at this for the first time, where could this reasonably go? Because we're anchoring based on things that we know and understand that we've internalized. So this is the bias that we're working with, right? It's the known
Mhm.
knowns, and and it's the lanes that we're already in, right? That so for many people, we're not necessarily seeing what AI is doing or could be doing outside of our current work.
Right.
And so a potential disruption is you bring in enterprise AI that, can actually cross-cut a lot of, different search functions in the organization, research functions or summary functions, or, various types of activities in the organization. That's going to be awfully disruptive to people who are already in those
Yes.
jobs.
Oh, yes.
But we're not envisioning what that could look like. We're envisioning how AI can help us. This happened during the dot-com boom too,
It did.
right?
Yeah.
Where you and I have talked about this, certainly in other webinars and just privately too, that, we witnessed how many people thought, yay, Google, and, and how Google was just going to, propel the work of librarians, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
What it also ended up doing, unintended consequences, was the end user thought that they were empowered now and they don't need librarians. And so we ended up seeing, it happened to coincide with a recession, but we ended up seeing that a lot of librarians were laid off because people thought that Google was going to replace librarians. And obviously there was a correction there.
Mhm.
We're seeing very similar things too, where we're only seeing it through our own functional, practical lens, but we're not seeing what AI can do, right? In terms of, the overall processes and systems within the organization,
Mhm.
and the threats and opportunities that it poses, right, to the humans, right, that are in, these processes and systems. So I think that it's really important that as we evaluate how AI can support decision making and looking at these tools, we also understand, or that we break out of, these are the functional perspectives that we have,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
looking at what is the the true capabilities, and then perhaps even the promise of what AI can do, and then how can we position ourselves towards that, towards better decision support, because a lot of people are going to be making real mistakes in bringing in AI. And when you do that, you can expect that there are going to be huge gaps that are in place, or or huge decision missteps. And, and the effects of that, right, could be significant to to organizations, because people didn't do their homework.
Yeah. And some people might reach the wrong conclusions about the applicability of AI in those instances. And the missteps or the poor decisions that you're talking about may be attributed to the fact that AI was to the AI because AI was involved in the decision, as opposed to did we think appropriately about how to update our priors on how decisions are made based on the presence or the ability of AI. And I really like your framing about moving beyond when we're ready as organizationally or societally to move beyond how does AI help me do what I'm doing today, to thinking about doing new ways. One of the most fascinating stages of technological adoption for me is analogized, excuse me, by the first motion picture cameras. And they would go to a playhouse and they would basically put a camera there and they would record a performance of the play. And then to think, well, what if I have multiple cameras, or if I move the camera around, or I do different scenes, and that modification of what came, basically like this is a way to capture what came before, versus this is a whole new art form or a whole new mechanism. And when going back to your point before about these micro startups that have realistic plans to grow to, a $500 million ARR business with 10 employees,
Mhm.
in a B2B environment, which is, as a strategist in that domain, is very, very interesting to me. To say, when you're starting with a blank slate and you're thinking about these tools, in that context, what does that make possible? And of course, decision support is one of those functions that is going to be radically transformed, and all the functions that own some piece of decision support. What does decision support look like when there is that enterprise AI tool that you mentioned that facilitates collaboration in and interaction with both the AI and with our fellow humans as individuals and as functional teams in ways we've never been able to do before? It's all very exciting.
I think it is too. And, recognizing all the inherent risks, involved as well. And that's, another
True.
conversation we
Yep.
can
Yep.
certainly have, because I know it's also near and dear to you. And, I think that, and so I think that for us, given where most of us are sitting right now, we need to be thinking about how we can contemplate AI, not just from the standpoint of, well, it's more of the Goldilocks approach, right? We want to find that just right zone, as opposed to putting too much faith in AI and overshooting, or not putting enough, right? And now we've got missed opportunities.
Mhm.
So and I think the only way we can achieve that is actually having that rigor, right, of examination, right, of
Mhm.
evaluating where we're at, where, and then externally where the technology actually is and how it can support us, and then also planning for the future, right? Sort of, that whole Wayne Gretzky, famous
Skating
quote
to
about
where the
skating
puck
to
is going to
hockey.
be, or
Yeah,
whatever it
exactly.
was. Yeah.
Exactly. I think there's an element of that too, because AI is rapidly shifting,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
rapidly shifting. Now, obviously, it's really daunting. You and I do this, just, almost as much as we're breathing, is to try to stay on top of this. And it's still very, very daunting.
There are still
Um,
days I feel like I'm barely keeping pace.
well, just what's published in archive alone, right? So it's
Yeah.
just, I've actually lost track of the statistic, but at one point, it is going back a couple of years now. It really went from just, just a few publications a week, to literally hundreds of publications a week on AI. And it gets to the point where that's really unsustainable. In fact, there's an AI solution for that.
Of course there is. Yes.
Right. But so maybe, but it is really hard. And so that goes back to the idea that this is a team-based effort.
Mhm.
We need
It
to
does.
have
Yeah.
people with various domain expertise to be the eyes and ears, to bring it back to the organization, to help the organization to understand what the opportunities are, the threats, the challenges, the various types of risks, if we were to kind of, pull on lever A versus lever B and so on, right? This needs to be an iterative discussion. I don't even see an end to that, because as AI continually evolves, right, we continue to have that. And it's important to have this cross-functional, cross-sectional team that can help the organization through this. It's not a top-down effort. It's not just a kind of a tactical, everyone adopts their own AI effort. And it's not even, kind of a mid-tier effort where we were thinking, hey, let's just kind of do an agentic process thing, because it all has to work together, right,
It
ultimately.
does. Yeah.
And so I hope that this conversation, while we're, not getting too much into the technical piece, because I think that'll also come when we bring in more technical experts, that can shed more light on those technical pieces for us and help people stay up to speed. But I think, right now we're helping people focus on how to think about, right, AI and decision making
Mhm. Yeah.
start, and first, how, we can make decisions regarding, AI itself, and then how we can make decisions using various AI tools. And there will be there will be lots more to say, about both of these things and in other facets as well. But I hope that this gives people a good start, on thinking about some key aspects of this. And many of these tools really already exist. In fact, some of the thought leaders and channels I follow in the AI space, like, there are some phenomenal models that are being put out there right now on just how to frame AI in terms of, hey, the different types of different layers of AI training or AI learning that you can engage in, or these are the different facets of AI or different types of AI you can bring into your own organization. Now, they don't go into the aspect of mapping them to types of decision making, but that's where the human in the organization can, right, can support. But there's also that, and then there are also various types of systems for that are mapped to specific types of functions, marketing, sales, right? They have the one we mentioned earlier in the discussion about McKinsey, and the AI in banking. There are just so many ways to slice and dice this, and there are a lot of tools that we can use to touch on this. And probably it might be worthwhile at some point to also just kind of do some of our favorite tools, right, to support this
Oh,
type
yeah.
of effort.
Yeah.
I know, like and so I think that would be one. If people are also interested in that, just pop it in the comments and let us know which direction you're interested in going, the types of questions that you might have that we might be able to explore with you, as we continue to go. Because I think this is just scratching the surface, as you and
Yeah.
I really well.
Yeah, and I think we're probably bringing this to the close, and I think it's a great scratching, a great effort to scratch the surface. I liked your request for people watching this video to let us know what they would like to see next in the comments. Where else can people find us?
Well, interestingly, people can also find us on LinkedIn, and we also have a Substack channel too, where you can read more about this as well. And something else important too that I hope people will consider is, and we mentioned this in our opening welcome video, in which we mentioned that our intention for these videos is really for this to be very helpful to people in their own growth and their planning. And so one of the examples that we gave was, that you share this with your fellow team members in your own
Mhm.
organization, right? To get conversations going, and to get people thinking about things that they may not be thinking about. But also, even using this as a tool, say, for example, for team discussions, right? Perhaps, you can organize around one of these topics for a retreat, or perhaps just even, for deeper dives, right? To just kick things off in your own organization, to explore new ideas, new practices, to think about what it is you need to do. And so, perhaps, as we drop this on a semi-weekly basis, let this become appointment viewing for you.
Mhm.
And, so that, okay, well, every week, let's check in, with, what August and Cynthia are talking about, and see if, this is something that, we might be able to think about as well. Or perhaps take one of the topics and say, yeah, we need to do a deeper dive on this one. And, and use that as a starting point. This is really meant to be useful. We're not just doing this just, well, we could just be doing this because it's fun for us, because
It is
that's
fun.
what we've been doing. Yeah, that's what we've been doing for years. But we're bringing it public, these conversations public, is so that we hope to bring these types of questions and considerations so that people can actually use this in their own practices.
Yeah.
So think about this, from a more so formal basis as well. Like, bring us into your organization for conversations, or to bring these ideas in, for conversations, and to maybe you can design even exercises around what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Cynthia. Thank you so much. I think that's
Thank
a
you.
great point. Yeah.
Well, it's always fun, for us to chat, and I hope that people will certainly like and subscribe. If you find value to this, share your thoughts as well, and help us uh, develop this into the direction that are important to you. And don't forget, let's collaborate.
Indeed.